Growing up with spirituality, you saw this guy Gurdjieff. And you said, "Who is he? And what is the meetings with remarkable men? And who are these men? And who's Ouspensky?" Do you ever wonder that? You see all the New Age bookstores. You got Gurdjieff. We're going to read
I still wonder.
in a pretty good book that summarizes most of movements in Western mysticism and esoteric items, which is pretty good for analysis of all these ideas.
I always wonder what's in a book.
And given the fact that I exercised already before this reading, that means I must be on the fourth way.
Fourth what?
I wanted to go on. What we wanted to do was go on the fourth way. I'm going to read you the ideas from page 266 of Gurdjieff. And like, you know, you're curious about all subsets of gurus, right? If you're into spirituality, say, I have to know all gurus. But he's not a guru, he claims. He's a spiritual teacher, like they all claim. As a spiritual teacher, Gurdjieff did not simply impart doctrines. Instead, he acted on his students in various ways calculated to place them in situations he believed were necessary for their development. Like Socrates, his father was a Greek. Like Socrates, he changed his approach depending on the person or the group he was dealing with and the circumstances of the moment. The result of this is that we have been left with wildly conflicting accounts both of Gurdjieff's character and his manner of teaching, hence the title of Margaret Anderson's 1962 memoir, The Unknown Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff did have a philosophy, but it was always taught, and still is taught, within the context of a school, a group of individuals devoted to what is referred to as the work. Led by one or more teachers, Gurdjieff and his followers are unwavering in their persistence that solitary individuals can accomplish little in the work. They like to work together. The Gurdjieffian school is not an ashram, however. It is not intended as a refuge from life. Here we come to the meaning of what Gurdjieff called the fourth way. Widely used to refer to the movement he founded, the first way is that of the fakir, who develops control over his physical body. The way of the monk is the second way. He concentrates chiefly on emotional control. Third way is that of the yogi, whose attainments are mainly intellectual. That's to be debated. Intellectual. All have two things in common. First, their development is one-sided. Second, they typically follow their path in separation from worldly affairs as much as possible. By contrast, the fourth way, this is the alternative route here, the fourth way. Fourth way is that of what Gurdjieff called the sly man, S-L-Y man. What's sly? Like a sly fox? What do you mean by sly? He does not separate himself from the world. Rather, he uses the world as a vehicle for work on himself. And that work, well, the world's probably working on you anyways. Like Thoreau.
And that, same thing.
And that work, well, he doesn't leave the world completely into a monastery. A lot of people don't.
He doesn't either.
No.
He, at least,
well, we shall see.
He doesn't consider it.
We'll see what he believes. He's a little different than everybody. And that work develops all his aspects. So here we have balance here. Physical, emotional, intellectual. Yes. Gurdjieff's vision of the fourth way is not that far removed from the left-hand path as conceived by traditionalist author Julius Evola, the path of the riding the tiger, of utilizing the world, including even the destructive, disintegrating forces of the present age, the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga. Seems we're in the Kali Yuga.
Using those forces also, that's interesting.
As a means to self-transformation. Riding the tiger. Here we have So he's going to write, this Gurdjieff school did not insulate their members from the world. Although the importance of a group and a teacher is heavily emphasized, there is a strong individualist element to the work as well. Gurdjieff steadfastly resisted the tendency of pupils to treat him as a guru. This is one of the things that make the fourth way a path for the West. For the West, as it is often called. Also, he insisted that pupils not take what he said in faith and verify all claims for themselves. The reason for this is simple. To blindly follow the word of a guru is a form of sleep, which is precisely what the Gurdjieff's work combats. Indeed, that man is, quote, man is asleep, is arguably the central tenet of Gurdjieff's philosophy, or at least the logical point to begin an account of it. Gurdjieff emphasizes that human beings, as they are, especially in the modern world, are thoroughly mechanical. Is that like thoroughly, Henry David, thoroughly mechanical? Thoroughly mechanical. He thinks we're acting like robots, just following our desires. You know, in a way, Thoreau thought that too. Thoreau thought we were mechanical, while they imagined themselves to be conscious and free. In fact, they are at the mercy of a variety of forces, usually completely unaware of this. This is true not only of ordinary people, but even of the vast majority of intellectuals. Most intellectuals are like machines as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think college professors are like robots following, trying to get their sabbatical?
All of them. Depends.
They're far more political than a corporation.
It depends. It all depends. It's on the person. It's not on.
Man is a machine, unquote. Gurdjieff tells Ouspensky in fragments. Quote, he can do nothing, unquote. Things simply happen to him. Well, it's true that things just happen to us.
75%.
Well, it's true. I think we idealize the fact that we can control all our future and all our life and stuff, but
A little bit.
But you can a little, but it's not quite that way. If you confront people with such claims, they become indignant. No one likes to be told he is a robot. You think I'm a robot?
We all are.
Am I following my tendency to read
Very
books?
Special robots.
Do I have a tendency to read books about mysticism? Like a robot?
The door opened, but the car is not here.
He likes to be told he is a robot, and everyone thinks he is not only conscious, but has a stable sense of personal identity. Well, we think we have a stable sense of personal identity. Do you have one?
Not a stable.
In fact, Gurdjieff argues that the vast majority of people have no authentic I at all and live in a constant state of self-deception about this. Rather, they have many eyes. Do I have many eyes? Like once I'm playing the piano, then I'm doing sports, and then
you have two behind you.
I have too many personalities. They have many eyes, each of which has been constructed in certain ways, especially as a result of some sort of experiences and psychoanalysts have described in vivid detail, unmet needs, repressed desires, internalization of voices of authority, and so forth. We're all kind of programmed a bit by our own mind. The sense of what Gurdjieff means can easily be seen if we reflect on the fact that frequently we respond to our own deeds as if they had been committed by another person. Quote, the I that got out of bed in the middle of the night and ate the rest of the pie is not the I that loathes the pie-eating I that following morning at 9. Do you ever eat something like too much chocolate and then feel like it wasn't you that did it?
No, I regretted it, but it was still me. I didn't think.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, these eyes. Well, we are ruled by these eyes, each of which we fully identify with in the moment. Each eye really is like a separate self, and none of them wants to be exposed because that would mean the diminishment of its hold on us. Thus, there is enormous resistance to seeing how we are, quote, taken by these, quote, eyes, how we are really mechanical and unfree. The eyes have so great an aversion to being exposed to the light that they will throw up all sorts of barriers to, quote, awakening, unquote, including dismissing Gurdjieff's claims as either absurd or applying only to, quote, to other people, but not to me. See, this applies to other people, their problems, but we're already perfect, probably. We're already enlightened. So this applies to other people. We're helping other people who haven't reached enlightenment here. As Gurdjieff has described it, the condition of most human beings is clearly one of great suffering, although again most are unaware that they suffer. We are deluded in thinking we will be truly fulfilled when all our needs and desires are satisfied. If we just got all the stuff we wanted, we would be done, wouldn't we? I still have a large bucket list to fill up.
No, it's the now maybe.
If I fill up the bucket list, I'll be satisfied.
Tomorrow?
Will I be satisfied if I just get my to-do list done? Since each eye has its own set of needs and desires, often conflicting, this is obviously a trap. Once we realize this and truly confront the degree to which we are mechanical, the result is potentially and quite literally ego-shattering. Some will flee from this into the safety of identifying with the I or that. Others, however, will be seized by a desire to overcome this condition as far as possible to, quote, wake up and achieve an authentic, quote, I, unquote. This desire is necessary precondition for, quote, work on your oneself, as it is called in the fourth way. We're taking a fourth approach to first, after being a fakir and a monk and a yogi. We already did yoga. He's already been like a monk too much. He meditates too much. As she complained, she's going to tell the master, how can you get him to meditate less? He meditates too much. In a moment, I will turn to the question of what specifically work consists in, but before doing it, I must note that Gurdjieff ties this, quote, psychological teaching to an elaborate cosmology involving a diagram called the, quote, ray of creation. I wonder what that is. Is that like the circles of Wujid? Circles of Wujid? Which sounds real, shows reality emerging from the absolute. The ray of creation must be understood in terms of what is known as the, quote, law of three and the law of the octave. The latter seems strikingly Pythagorean. Which here we have the connection to Pythagoras, which is of interest to me. Though one of my eyes says that I'm a Pythagorean. Dear? Does one of my eyes claim to be a Pythagorean?
None of your eyes do.
Are you and claim to be Pythagorean? You identify with Socrates.
I love Socrates, my sweet, loving teacher.
So you are in love with Socrates as one of your I selves. Mm-hmm. I am a follower of Pythagoras. I. That's all I think about is I. What does I think, believe? The latter
It's
seems
interesting
striking.
that, look at this. It's interesting that I and I,
Huh?
when you say I and when you say I, it somehow sounds the same.
The third eye is what I think about as I.
Yeah, like
My eye.
So
It's my eye. I have a third eye.
It's only in English that happens, though.
In my eye, I have it, and others don't.
The eye.
The latter seems strikingly Pythagorean. Gurdjieff argues that the octave of the musical scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, corresponds to a cosmic octave governing the emergence of the world from the absolute, as well as to the stages in the spiritual development of the individual. And here's where I connect to my I. I am a music theorist. So that's one of my eyes. I have a lot of eyes.
I forgot that.
He would say that I'm out of balance intellectually, that I need to do more physical like exercises. The law of three holds that every phenomenon exhibits three forces: the passive, active, passive, and neutralizing, or affirming, denying, and reconciling. In the fourth way teachings, the connection between the law of three and the law of the octave is explicated through the mysterious symbol known as the anagram. Have you heard of anagrams?
Yeah, but I forgot.
I don't ever understand. I have no eye that knows about the anagram. So, I actually heard of anagrams. To really do justice to Gurdjieff's philosophy, the intricacies of these laws and diagrams would have to be explained in detail, but this is simply not possible in a short introduction. See, this is like a short introduction because they have all these great big books that I haven't read. And maybe because my eyes at the time that I was young had too many other things to do. I was a young man and I was busy, so I didn't read all his books. So we're now reading a short introduction. For our purposes, we may focus instead on just one crucial point: Gurdjieff's views on the place of man in creation. First of all, he makes it clear that whether we choose to do the work and attempt to, quote, wake up, is not a purely personal matter. The work is not self-improvement, nor is happiness its goal. Instead, Gurdjieff claims that our ability to become conscious plays a crucial role in the life of the cosmos itself. Unfortunately, he also teaches, again, not unlike the traditionalist, that in the modern period it is more difficult than ever for us to perform this role. Quoted from Ouspensky's Fragments. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky both utilize the language of evolution to describe the process by which individuals can become conscious and play their part in the cosmic scheme. For Gurdjieff, the evolutionary process described by biologists only takes mankind up to a certain point of development. Going further involves, in fact, resisting the very physical forces that make our biological evolution possible. In Fragments, Ouspensky reports that Gurdjieff told him, quote, the law for man is existence in the circle of mechanical influences, the state of man-machine. The way of the development of hidden possibilities is a way against nature, against God. However, this is only possible for certain individuals. Gurdjieff teaches no doctrine of universal salvation. Only individuals of a very special sort can freely and consciously choose to wage war against sleep. He's against sleep. But in what way do these individuals participate in a cosmic process rather than a purely personal one? The answer to this question, we must look more close at what, quote, work on oneself consists in, and to the crucial concepts of remembering the self and self-observation. We had just watched a movie, right? The Meetings with Remarkable Men. What year was it made? Trying to think. Is it back in the 70s? 79 or forgot. It took place in that Afghanistan mostly. The reader should proceed with the warning that these are difficult ideas to explain and that there are significant differences of opinion within Gurdjieff's movement about what they mean and how to discuss them. The following is only one possible interpretation. But they have pretty good writers in this book. It's a Cambridge, so it's pretty, I think it's credible. Self-remembering at its most basic level consists in what we may call being present. That's classical, right? Being present. This is the vivid but inevitable sense which we have all experienced at one time or another of being here now. It is not what is often called today being in the moment, which seems to simply mean enjoying the present rather than being preoccupied by our cares. Instead, being present means being aware that I am in this body, at this time, having this experience. It involves a sense of being grounded in the body and in the present. Normally, consciousness is absorbed in some object or situation, and the sense that I am conscious and that it is happening in this body and now simply drops out. In other words, the self is forgotten. What Gurdjieff means by self-remembering is something like being aware that we are aware, or what is called in philosophy a perception. You heard of that word? A perception? This term actually comes up in the fragment shortly after encountering Gurdjieff. Ouspensky describes the concept of self-remembering to a friend who states permissively that this is nothing new. It's just a perception. The pretentious friend attributes the concept to Wilhelm Wundt. But of course Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, derives it from Kant, K-A-N-T. To be sure, self-remembering and Kantian a perception is not precisely exactly the same thing, but if one defines a perception simply as, quote, awareness that we are aware, this is helpful in getting to Gurdjieff's meaning. I think in some ways that's similar to mindfulness. I don't know about their concepts of mindfulness. Awareness that we are aware. Surely then, self-remembering involves a kind of bifurcation in consciousness. I am aware simultaneously of my surroundings and of myself being aware. Am I aware of myself reading this? I'm aware that I'm reading this book. This does not mean the same thing as having internal thoughts. Oh, I was thinking about I can't, and Carl Icahn. See, I was thinking during this reading about something else. Being aware, I am aware simultaneously of my surroundings, of myself being aware. This does not mean the same thing as having internal thoughts while being aware of external events. Gurdjieff and his followers continually emphasize the true self-remembering is grounded in the body, rather than something that takes place entirely above the neck. It's funny how they say sort of the brain and your mind is more than just up at your brain. Your mind is more than your brain. Your mind could be in your body. In fact, isn't it possible that your fingers could play the Bach fugue for you? Do my brain play it or does my fingers? Who plays the Bach fugue? Does Bach's soul? Does Bach's spirit?
The whole body is attuned when there is
Ideally,
the emotion is stronger. The
I
whole
should
body is attuned to the same thing.
Well, I have a choice. I can either.
So you cannot differentiate between the fingers. The fingers can bring up what your soul has.
Can my fingers connect to a muse?
Absolutely. They are the instruments.
Is it my brain?
Like a violin is connected to you. To you. It's an extension.
It's funny, I always used to think that somehow, like, you could almost connect to the soul of Beethoven while playing the sonata.
Well, you can connect to the soul of the
well,
writer
technically,
when you read the book.
in a way, you are connecting.
When I was reading a book, I always thought I was listening to the voice of the author. That was quite interesting.
You are, in a way, connecting to Beethoven by playing his piece. Definitely.
By listening to his piece.
You're absorbing his consciousness by his artwork, in a way.
If it is played well, even by
played well.
Is somebody who can listen to will also.
Yeah, but if you don't play it well, he won't listen to you, maybe. You play it well. If you play it well, he listens. Entirely above the neck, if our awareness of ourselves, being aware, becomes exclusively a matter of consciousness of our thoughts, then we will involve ourselves in all sorts of destructions and self-deceptions. Indeed, Gurdjieff and those trained by him give explicit instructions on how to ground attention in the body. So now he's like saying we should do juggling or something, or maybe play tennis or volleyball.
Connect with everything.
Once one is grounded in this way, one practices self-observation, and what is observed are the centers. Just, I see like chakras, but some accounts list for intellectual thought, emotional and feeling, moving and all learned actions of the organism, such as walking, eating, speaking, and instinctive, all inane, as opposed to learned activities of the organism, such as the work of the internal organs, reflexes, and sensations. More often, however, the last two are grouped together as a moving instinctive center. Well, my digestion takes place without me. Or does it? Since they both deal with actions learned or inane, voluntary or involuntary, of the physical organism. Each of these centers has its own way of sensing and being, and ideally they should be in harmony. I believe in the harmonious balance of the intellect, emotions, spirituality, physical body, but other bodies. In most people, some kind of disharmony is often present, and this usually consists in the overdevelopment of one center. For example, some individuals live in their heads, quote, live in their heads. They are focused almost entirely on the intellectual center and are numb to the others. This is a common malady of modern man, modern people. In a way, like you think it's just intellectuals, but I think most of modern people live in their heads. The practice of self-observation is supposed to reveal these imbalances. It involves noting such things as unnecessary thinking, emotional reactions, and our tendency to be, quote, taken by them, tension in the body, and habitual actions. Dear, do you have unnecessary thinking?
You have a lot of negative thinking.
I know I have unnecessary thinking. I think that as much as 95% could be unnecessary.
Unfortunately.
In fact, they say, people who've counted that, I think some people like in mindfulness studies count it, and 95% was unnecessary. And then emotional reactions, like, do you have emotional reactions? A lot or some?
Now, what do you do?
I have quite a few. I have reactions. It's hard to get rid of them. You're like he said, you were programmed. And habitual actions, tension in the body. For example, some people, quote, live in their heads. Do you live in your head? They are focused almost entirely on the intellectual center and are numb to the others. This is the common malady of modern people. The practice of self-observation is supposed to reveal these imbalances. Not interested.
Why do you read on that?
Oh dear. I'm going to read it. Noting such things as unnecessary thinking, emotional reactions, and our tendency to be taken by them, and tension in the body, habitual actions. Gurdjieff maintains that self-observation requires an unspattering honesty. One will discover all sorts of things to dislike in oneself, and the process can be painful. It is referred to in the fourth way as voluntary suffering. This one habitual action that will frequently take us in the practice of self-observation is the tendency to judge what one observes. But Gurdjieff teaches that this is a trap in judging. One eye is simply passing sentence on another. And quite obviously, when we judge, we have stopped observing. Similarly, observation is not analysis. Just as one should refrain from judging, so one should also make no attempt to change what is observed. There will be enormous temptation to do this, since much of what one observes about oneself is negative. Gurdjieff teaches that it is vital to the work to come to terms with just how mechanical we are, and that most attempts to change are futile. As a result of such claims, some see Gurdjieff's philosophy as extraordinarily pessimistic. In fact, he does offer hope. The very act of observing our negative qualities creates, quote, space between our observing selves and those qualities. This means that over time, their hold on us may gradually be diminished. Those who are, quote, in the work do practice self-observation and meditation, referred to as sittings. But since the fourth way involves engagement with the world, students practice self-observation in a variety of life contexts. And a particular emphasis is placed on observation while engaged in physical work. And the importance of bodily orientation is frequently mentioned. Erect posture is emphasized as conducive to the cultivation of the right sort of attention, as well as the absence of unnecessary physical tension. Observation again involves awareness of all the sinners. However, where awareness is not really the right term. Rather, what Gurdjieff seems to mean is that we should be fully present to both to and through the centers. To and through. Henry David Thoreau, through the centers. The deal is to be aware of the world out there, but through all the centers, and again to be aware of ourselves in all these centers, simultaneously to remember the self. In other words, the work involves achieving a state in which we are present to the being of the world and to our own being, taken together, the world out there and the one in here, in ourselves, between what we make an artificial division, our everything. We may therefore say in sum that the objective of the work is simply to be present to what is. In Heideggerian terms, we would say that the Gurdjieff work is a praxis for the full development of Dasein, the Heidegger's term for the fundamental nature of humanity as the being who is open to being as such. Dasein, D-A-S-E-I-N. There's only 2 pages there. However, it must be noted that the fourth way, the term being, has a special technical meaning, in which this is reflected, for example, in the title chosen for Jean de Salzmann's posthumously published notes, The Reality of Being. If one does not understand the connotations of these works in Gurdjieff's teaching, this title may seem vacuous or redundant. But it is neither. In the fourth way, the term being is usually used to refer to an attribute of man. Gurdjieff and his followers use the word a great deal, and it is often juxtaposed with knowledge. Gurdjieff states that it is possible for a man to have a great deal of knowledge while having a low level of being and ease. And he says that this is not only common in modern Western culture, it is not even perceived as a problem. What Gurdjieff is referring to is the familiar phenomenon of, say, the professor, who possesses a great deal of book learning, but who is also petty, absent-minded, and neurotic. Or, to take an example of a more recent vintage, the techno-wizard who is socially dysfunctional to the point of autism. Here, do we have like high-tech, like quants or geeks, they call them, that are socially dysfunctional, hackers. So there are a lot of hackers, they just sit at their computer and play video games. But are they functional? The professor who possesses a great deal of book learning, but who is also petty, absent-minded, and neurotic. And weak, by the way. Do you think you get weak from reading books all the time?
No, I don't read so much to get weak, and I read the best. I get strong.
You can get stronger. Well, we're just talking about balance here. I wouldn't suggest that you not be a professor. I would say you should be a strong professor. And the techno hackers, they could be also top pro tennis players with a good social life and be socially functional. Be good to their mom and not play their video game all the time. It is clear for both examples that being is not reducible to character. Absent-mindedness and social ineptness are not moral failings. Rather, for Gurdjieff, being seems to involve a kind of self-possession or self-mastery that cannot be acquired via knowledge in the sense of the accumulation of facts. However, Gurdjieff also states that knowledge depends on being. What is meant by knowledge in this context is authentic knowledge, or knowledge of the whole, as Gurdjieff is quoted as saying in fragments. This is, of course, the conception of wisdom. Do you believe in wisdom or knowledge? Wisdom the philosophers have held from Plato to Hegel. The difference is that Western philosophers conceive knowledge of the whole as knowledge of a system of ideas or concepts that serve to explain everything. For Gurdjieff, by contrast, knowledge of the whole involves what's sometimes called in the fourth way direct knowing. Like the concept of mystical gnosis, of which it may be equivalent, direct knowing is extraordinarily hard to put into words. Here I will merely suggest that direct knowing may be just what I described earlier, at the state of being present to the being of the world and to our own being. In other words, knowledge of all things is a direct knowing of the being of all. Is this the same thing as knowing what Gurdjieff terms the absolute? Perhaps. Gurdjieff believes that an individual can cultivate his or her level of being through the development of this capacity, which involves the harmonization of all the centers. I have to get in harmony. Thus, it is precisely through being present to being that I actualize my own being in Gurdjieff's sense of the word. But now an important question arises. Just what is it that is present to being? I have said that this state is one in which we are present to both what is out there and in here, simultaneously present to the all. But what is it in this, us, that does this? I cannot belong to any of the centers, intellectual, emotional, and moving instinctive, precisely because the attention Gurdjieff wishes us to cultivate observes all the centers. And so we must ask, what is the self that observes? What is the self that remembers itself? It is with the asking of these questions that Gurdjieff's philosophy converges with the most profound perennial teachings of mysticism, East and West. You got a headache from my reading?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, too much the same.
Can you tolerate for a little longer? With
Yes.
the self. The self, what is the self that remembers itself? It is with the asking of these questions that Gurdjieff's philosophy converges with the most profound perennial teachings of mysticism, East and West. Here we have Jacob Needleman, who's pretty credible. Jacob Needleman writes that the, quote, the proper relationship of the three centers in the human being is a necessary precondition for the reception and realization of what in the religions of the world has been variously termed the Holy Spirit, Atman, and the Buddha nature. Note that Needleman says, quote, reception and realization, unquote, reception, unquote, implies that something outside and distinct from us enters in, whereas, quote, realization implies that something is born within us and through us. One frequently finds this ambiguity in the mystics, and the reason is simple. The self that remembers itself, that is capable of being present to being, is not myself, where myself refers to my individual ego and all its idiosyncratic vices, virtues, and quirks. But beneath that, there is another self that is capable of seeing all of my individual qualities, and hence isn't any of them. This self is by definition impersonal. Thus it is mine and not mine. Thus it is mine and not mine, and so it is perfectly reasonable to speak of identification with the self as if it were the reception of something distinct from me, since it really is distinct from me. But it is equally reasonable to speak of it as a realization of something already in me, since it is the real me. Gurdjieff's work appears to be about giving birth to a higher self within oneself. The strong suggestion is that it is through us that the absolute comes to consciousness of itself. To be present to being is to be able to say with Parmenides, quote, it is. But what says this is not an individual finite being, but rather an infinite, not individual, not limited self to which all finite beings present themselves. It is the soul of the all, Needleman's Holy Spirit, Atman, or Buddha nature, awakened within an individual human being. It is not, quote, I that wakes up in the sense of my individual selfhood or ego. It is something far greater, and yet again it is, quote, I, the authentic I that is occluded by the many finite I's spoken of earlier. Thus, the message of the goddess of Parmenides, quote, it is, unquote, ultimately is equivalent to the message God gave to Moses, quote, I am. Exodus 3:14. When the authentic, quote, I in me is able to say, quote, I am, then, quote, my, quote, unquote, being in Gurdjieff's sense is realized. And being confronts itself, hence the title of Gurdjieff's Life is only real then when, quote, I am, as well as the title given to Jean de Salzman's posthumous book, The Reality of Being. Fourth Way claims to teach a clear path to the realization of being. Still, although the path may be clear, it is far from easy. As noted earlier, Gurdjieff holds that the I's will fight attempts to observe them and will erect all sorts of barriers and distractions to work. However, the Fourth Way teaches that resistance is actually useful material for self-observation, and that there can be no progress without it. Observation of resistance continually confronts us with our mechanicalness. This can produce a kind of shock and flash of awakening, which can have a profound effect. Gurdjieff does not, however, promise us enlightenment. There will never come a point when we, quote, wake up, unquote, permanently, and the work is no longer necessary. As it is in ordinary life, so it is in the Gurdjieff work. Awakening is not a constant state, but a continually repeated process of emerging from sleep. Hence the title of Colin Wilson's 1980 book on Gurdjieff, The War Against Sleep. For Gurdjieff and his followers, it is a war without end. That gives an idea of Gurdjieff from this book. It's a good short chapter summarizing different things. Chapter 24 by Glenn Alexander Magee. Where is he from? What are they? All the authors of this book. There's the contributors. The recommended books. Any questions? The books for Gurdjieff's in the Fourth Way are the Meetings with Remarkable Men, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Life is Only Real Then When I Am, James Moore, Gurdjieff, The Anatomy of a Myth, Needleson, Gurdjieff Essays, Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching,
In Search of the Miraculous.
Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution, The Reality of Being, Without Benefit of Clergy, The Harmonious Circle. They have a harmonious circle, the life and works of Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, and their followers. Those are all the different books recommended. We're reading from the Cambridge Handbook of Western Mysticism and Esotericism. Actually, it's edited by the writer of this article I just read. So we went to Cambridge. Do you think that's excessively intellectual? Do you think it was an excessively intellectual analysis of
more
Gurdjieff?
beats.
Huh? Well, beets.
We should go and have a beet juice.
But we had a beet juice. But that's a mechanical response to what we've been doing, and we already been obsessed with beets. I'm going to go have beet juice as a way of balancing my intellectual with my physical and my emotional state. Can we be, as a couple, emotionally happy together drinking beet juice after this reading? Now, I've balanced myself by first meditating, then going to exercise, doing tennis and juggling, and then intellectually achieve something by reading this book. And then we're going to focus on physical things like food with beets. And then we're going to think about Christmas. All right. I think we're done with Gurdjieff. Do you have any way forward with him? We may encounter him again. But why did he make a splash in all the New Age bookstores? He always appears there. Do you know he influenced Georgia O'Keeffe, Frank Lloyd Wright, T.S. Eliot? Karen? Do you know his family settled in Kars? Do you know his father is Greek? Do you know... There's the film Meetings with Remarkable Men, appears in 1979. And where was the film on? I think you can rent it on YouTube. You have to pay. Did we have to pay? I think so. You know how many pages in Beelzebub? 1,135. All right, we're done with Gurdjieff.